I used to think the quiet was peaceful. That stillness meant everything was okay. But over time, I learned that silence has a way of telling the truth when words won't. It creeps in when the love fades, and it fills up all the space that used to be warm. Kaisen and I had been married for 17 years, and lately, the house felt more like a museum than a home. Everything looked fine on the outside, the polished wood floors, the framed photos of family vacations, the wine rack we never touched anymore. But it was all just background noise. We hadn't made love in over 3 years. We barely even touched. His side of the bed stayed cold most nights, even when he was lying in it. He still kissed my cheek before turning off the lights, like that tiny act could hold the weight of everything else that was missing. I didn't have the energy to ask for more anymore. I just rolled over, closed my eyes, and pretended I was asleep before he could ask what was wrong. But pretending only works for so long. That summer, his son Ethan came home from college. 19 years old. Taller. Voice deeper. Shoulders broader than I remembered. I hadn't seen him in almost a year, and something about him felt different. Not just older, more grounded. There was a calmness in him that made you want to stop and pay attention. It started with the porch light. It had gone out weeks ago. Kaisen kept saying he'd fix it. He never did. One night, I poured myself a glass of wine and went out to sit in the dark. The wind was soft. The air is warm. I liked the way the quiet wrapped around me, even if it felt lonely. I was used to being lonely by then. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Soft ones. I turned and saw Ethan, barefoot, hands in the pockets of his hoodie, eyes gentle but curious. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood next to me and looked out into the yard like he belonged there. "You always sit out here alone?" he asked eventually. I gave him a small smile. "Only when I want peace." He nodded. "Want help changing that light bulb?" I blinked at him, surprised. "You know how?" He grinned, and for the first time, I saw the edges of a man forming in his boyish features. "Better than Dad." We laughed. Just a little. And then he climbed up, replaced the bulb, and like that, the light came back on. We stayed out there for almost an hour. Talking about nothing. Laughing here and there. It wasn't anything heavy. But something about it stayed with me. The way he looked at me, it wasn't just polite. It wasn't the way a stepson looks at his stepmother. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a flicker. Just a passing look in the dark. But something had shifted. I just didn't know yet how much. It's strange how something can start to change without a single word being spoken. After that night on the porch, Ethan began showing up more. Not in a way that made you question anything. Just around. Present. Always there, but never too close. Always helpful, but never pushy. He started doing things that, truthfully, caught me off guard. Taking the trash out without being asked. Fixing the loose handle on the kitchen drawer that Kaisen had ignored for months. Grabbing an extra bag of coffee from the store just because he knew I was running low. I told myself it was sweet. Just a thoughtful young man. But I could feel it, this quiet shift in the air around him. Around us. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, chopping onions with music playing low in the background. Fleetwood Mac. My usual cooking playlist. The house was warm with the smell of garlic and rosemary. And then, without a sound, I felt someone behind me. I turned around quickly, still holding the knife. It was Ethan, standing in the doorway with a folded stack of laundry in his arms. He gave me a sheepish smile. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You always zone out when you cook?" I laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Only when I'm trying not to cry over onions." He chuckled and leaned casually against the counter. His eyes weren't on the food, or the mess, or the clock. They were on me. "Smells really good in here," he said. It was a simple sentence. But the way he said it, he wasn't talking about the food. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He didn't step closer. He didn't flirt. He just looked, and it was enough to leave my heart thudding in my chest. That night, after Kyson had done his usual routine, eat, shower, fall asleep to a podcast, I stayed downstairs. I curled up on the couch with a book, more for comfort than for reading. The pages blurred after a while. My mind wasn't on the story in front of me. Around 11, I heard footsteps. Ethan came down the stairs, barefoot and relaxed. He looked at me, eyes soft beneath the dim glow of the hallway light. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" "Same." He looked around, then held up the remote. "Wanna watch something?" I nodded. "Pick whatever." He sat on the other end of the couch, keeping a respectful distance. At first, the movie was loud and fast-paced, some kind of spy thriller. I wasn't really watching it. My thoughts were louder than the dialogue. At some point, he stretched out his legs. Then leaned back. Then scooted in just slightly. And then, our knees touched. It was the tiniest bit of contact. Nothing bold. But neither of us moved. I raised an eyebrow and tried to play it off. "You always take up the whole couch?" I teased. He grinned, slow, confident. "Only when it's worth sharing." My stomach flipped. I looked away quickly and laughed like it was no big deal. But inside? I was a mess. Not because of what he said, but because of how it made me feel. Let me pause right there and say this, because I know what you're probably thinking. I would never. That's your stepson. This is wrong. And maybe you're right. Maybe you would never. Maybe it's easy to say that when you've never felt invisible in your own home. When no one's gone years without noticing how your voice cracks when you say "I'm fine." But the truth is, being seen is dangerous when you've been starving for it. And that's what Ethan did. He saw me. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's stepmother. Not as the tired woman washing dishes alone at 10 p.m. He saw me. When the movie ended and the credits started to roll, we didn't speak. We just sat there. Still. Quiet. The room felt heavy, like it was holding its breath with us. And then he said it. Barely above a whisper. "You deserve more than this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood up slowly, whispered goodnight, and went to my room. But those words. They didn't stay in the living room. They followed me all the way up the stairs, curled around me in bed, and stayed behind my eyelids long after I closed them. And maybe that's why, when I woke up to the soft creak of my door opening the next night, I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just sat up. And waited for what he was going to say next. The thing no one tells you about these moments, the ones that change everything, is that they don't feel like thunder. They don't explode. They whisper. They creep in on soft feet. They feel like a held breath, a skipped beat, a flicker that becomes a flame before you know how to put it out. That night, when I heard my door creak open, I didn't even pretend to be asleep. I turned my head slowly toward the sound, heart hammering so hard I thought he'd hear it. Ethan stood in the doorway. His silhouette was just barely lit by the hallway light behind him. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there, like he wasn't sure what to do next. And maybe I should have said something right then. Maybe I should have told him to leave, to go back to his room, to forget whatever he thought this was. But I didn't. I sat up in bed. I was still wearing a t-shirt and loose pajama shorts, and suddenly I was very aware of how bare my legs felt under the covers. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. Not in a rush. Not sneaking. Like he wasn't afraid, just honest. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "I know I shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard. "Then why are you?" He paused, standing at the foot of my bed. His hands were at his sides, clenched loosely like he was trying to hold something back. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he said. "And it's messing with my head." I looked down at my lap, at the way my fingers had started fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was allowed to say. This was the part where I was supposed to shut it all down. Be the grown-up. The stepmother. The voice of reason. But I was tired. Tired of always being the responsible one. Tired of holding it all in while my own heart starved quietly in the background. So instead, I asked him, "What are you thinking right now?" He took one step forward. "That you look even more beautiful when you're not pretending to be okay." That broke me. Just a little. Because he was right. I was always pretending. Always putting on a face, keeping things calm, controlled, appropriate. And here he was, seeing past all of it like it was never even there. I looked up at him again, and for the first time in a long time, I let someone see the ache behind my eyes. The tiredness. The loneliness. The fear that maybe I wasn't wanted anymore. He didn't move closer. He didn't touch me. He just stood there. And waited. I patted the space beside me. Just once. Just a soft, nervous tap of the mattress. And he sat down. The bed dipped slightly under his weight, the way a moment changes when someone finally enters it fully. Neither of us spoke. I could feel the heat from his body next to mine. The quiet between us was louder than anything either of us could have said. Then, gently, he spoke again. "I don't want to ruin anything. But I needed you to know. You matter to me." I turned to face him. My voice was barely there when I said it, "You matter to me, too." And we sat like that, for a long time. Not touching. Just breathing the same air, hearts racing side by side. Eventually, he stood up and whispered, "Good night." I nodded, unable to say anything else. My throat had closed up, full of everything I wasn't ready to feel. He opened the door, slipped out, and closed it behind him. And I laid back down in the dark, staring at the ceiling, pulse still jumping under my skin. I knew a line had been crossed. Even without a kiss. Even without a touch. Because you don't need skin to be touched deeply. All it takes is someone seeing you, fully, and choosing to stay. The days that followed didn't feel normal, but we both tried to pretend they were. I still woke up before the sun, padded through the kitchen barefoot, made Kaisen's coffee even though he barely said thank you anymore. I still folded his laundry, listened to his stories about work as he stared at his phone, nodding along like I was paying attention. But something inside me had cracked open, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't close it. Ethan never brought up that night. Not with words. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't stiff or guilty, it was full of something unspoken, something simmering just under the surface. And he was still there. Always there. Fixing things that weren't broken. Asking questions no one else bothered to ask. "You okay?" he'd ask when I dropped a plate or paused too long in the middle of a sentence. And I'd lie, out of habit, not cruelty. "Yeah, just tired." But I think he knew. I think he always knew. Then came the night that tipped everything. It was a Thursday. Kaisen had flown out for a conference in Portland, some industry thing with cocktails and keynote speakers and late dinners he'd never invite me to. He texted me once that day, just a dry flight number and a thumbs-up emoji when he landed. I didn't reply. That night, I lit candles in the living room, more for comfort than ambience. I poured a glass of red wine and curled up on the couch with a book I'd read 3 times already. The kind of book where the woman chooses herself in the end, even if she loses everything else. I didn't hear Ethan come downstairs. I just looked up, and there he was. He wore a simple white t-shirt and dark jeans. Barefoot again. Hair still damp from a shower. He looked effortless, like a walking version of the thing I hadn't let myself want in years. He held a small white box in his hands. "What's that?" I asked, startled by how nervous my voice sounded. He shrugged. I know your birthday's next week, but… I couldn't wait. My throat went dry. Ethan, you didn't have to. I wanted to, he interrupted gently. You always do stuff for everyone else. You never get anything back. He handed me the box. Inside was a red dress, soft, silky, with a deep back and a slit that made my breath catch in my throat. I blinked at it, stunned. This is, wow. Ethan, this is beautiful. I thought it might make you feel something, he said. Something besides invisible. I looked up at him, and my heart clenched. He didn't say it with an edge. He said it like it was the most honest thing in the world. I haven't worn anything like this in years, I whispered, running my fingers along the fabric. I don't even know if it fits. Try it on, he said, voice calm, unreadable. If it doesn't, we'll burn it. That made me laugh, a real one. I nodded, took the box, and disappeared into my bedroom. The moment the dress touched my skin, I changed. Not just on the outside. It hugged me in all the right places, made my waist look narrow, made my legs feel longer, made me remember I had curves I hadn't noticed in a long time. My light brown hair, still a little tousled from the day, fell softly around my shoulders. I looked at myself in the mirror and for a second, I didn't see the tired wife or the stepmother who always came last. I saw a woman. Just a woman. Still alive. Still wanted. When I stepped into the living room, Ethan stood up slowly. His eyes found me and didn't leave. You look, he paused, swallowing hard. You look stunning. I blushed, turning away to fix a candle that didn't need fixing. You're exaggerating. I'm not, he said, voice lower now. Not even a little. The room felt warmer than it had all day. I sat down across from him, unsure of what to do with my hands. He poured 2 glasses of wine, careful, steady, like this wasn't his first time setting a scene like this. We talked about light things at first. Music. College. My garden. Then the conversation shifted. Why are you still with him? Ethan asked, suddenly serious. I blinked. With Kyson? He nodded. You don't smile around him. You don't even speak. I didn't have a real answer. Just a shrug. Because I've always been with him. Habit isn't love, he said. And you shouldn't be loved like a habit. I stared at my wineglass, feeling a lump rise in my throat. He leaned forward slightly. You know I'd treat you better, right? I looked up. His eyes didn't flinch. His voice didn't shake. And everything inside me, the guilt, the fear, the years of being overlooked, clashed with something deeper. Something hungrier. Ethan, I started, but the words broke in the middle. I didn't know what to say. What I was allowed to say. He stood slowly. Walked to my side. Sat next to me on the couch without a word. Then, softly, he said it again. You deserve to be seen. And then, he kissed me. Not rushed. Not forceful. Just, like he meant it. My body froze for a second, and then I felt myself melt into it. Like something inside me finally exhaled. The kiss didn't last long. It didn't need to. When he pulled away, I looked at him, completely breathless. I need to go to my room, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. He nodded, his jaw tense, but his eyes still soft. I get it, he said. I'm sorry. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood, my legs shaky beneath me, and walked away. But even as I lay in bed that night, I knew. This wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, just like I always did. But something in the air felt heavier than usual, like the house itself was holding its breath. The red dress lay folded at the foot of my bed. I had slipped out of it after I closed my door the night before, folding it neatly like it was just another piece of clothing. But it wasn't. Not anymore. It had become a memory stitched in silk. A confession I hadn't said out loud. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my teeth, but I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes looked the same, but they felt different. Like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. I had kissed Ethan. Or maybe he had kissed me. Or maybe, truthfully, I'd met him halfway. Downstairs, the kitchen was already warm with the smell of eggs and toast. I paused on the last step, not expecting anyone else to be awake. But there he was. Ethan. Barefoot again. Hair still messy from sleep. Standing by the stove like he belonged there. He glanced up the moment he heard me. "Morning," he said. Like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said. Like nothing had happened. "Morning," I replied, my voice too soft, too careful. I walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window longer than necessary. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was loaded. Every movement, every glance, felt charged. He handed me a plate without a word. I took it. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, barely touching our food. He kept glancing up at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. I finally spoke first. "About last night." He set his fork down slowly. "Yeah?" I struggled for words. "I don't know what that was." He nodded. "It was real. That's all I know." And just like that, my heart jumped. Because deep down, I knew he was right. It had been real. Too real. But real doesn't always mean right. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, and if I step off, I don't know if I'll ever get back." He looked down, running his thumb along the edge of his plate. Then he said, "Then don't step back." His voice was calm, steady, but there was something raw underneath it. Like he had already made peace with whatever came next. "I know it's complicated," he added, "but I've never said anything I didn't mean. And I meant it when I said you deserve to be seen. Loved. Chosen." That last word. Chosen. It hit me so hard, I had to close my eyes. Because that's what it always came down to, didn't it? Being chosen. Not tolerated. Not kept around out of habit. But chosen, deliberately, fully, like someone had looked at all your cracks and still said yes. And Kyson? He hadn't chosen me in years. After breakfast, Ethan cleaned up quietly. I lingered in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone. I could hear the clinking of dishes, the running water, the soft hum of the dishwasher starting. I kept waiting for the guilt to crash over me like a wave, to drown me in shame. But it didn't. What came instead was grief. Grief for the version of me that had waited so long for someone to come home and notice her. Grief for the 17 years I had spent playing the role of a wife instead of living as a woman. And somewhere in that grief, there was also a flicker of relief. Because someone had finally seen me. And even if it was wrong, even if nothing ever came of it, it reminded me that I was still here. Still capable of being wanted. Still capable of wanting. Later that afternoon, I stood at the hallway mirror, brushing through my hair when I caught a glimpse of him behind me. Ethan. He leaned against the doorframe, quiet, watching. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said, like it had just occurred to him. "Leaving?" I turned, surprised. "I thought you were staying till the end of the month." He shrugged. "Changed my mind." I knew what that meant. He wasn't running. He was stepping back, giving me space. Giving me the chance to pretend nothing had happened. I didn't want you to think I was trying to mess things up for you," he added. "That's not what this is." "I know," I said, and my voice cracked when I said it. He walked over slowly, paused in front of me. Not touching. Just standing close enough for me to feel the warmth of him again. "I'm not asking you to say anything. Or do anything," he whispered. I just needed you to know that, for a moment, you meant the world to me. That's all. I blinked away the sting in my eyes. You still do. He smiled softly, but there was pain in it. Then he turned and walked away. And I didn't stop him. That night, I sat alone in bed, the house still, the silence no longer peaceful. The red dress still folded neatly on the chair. And I thought, I don't know where this goes. I don't know if I'll ever see him the same way again. But I know this much. Something in me woke up that night. And now that it's awake, it refuses to go back to sleep. The morning Ethan left, I stood at the kitchen window watching his car pull out of the driveway. He didn't look back. And I didn't wave. I just stood there, coffee growing cold in my hands, heart somewhere between my throat and my stomach. There was no dramatic goodbye. No whispered promise. No kiss at the door. But I felt it anyway, like something sacred had been packed into that suitcase along with his socks and t-shirts. Something I hadn't fully unpacked myself. And just like that, he was gone. The house felt different. Quieter, somehow. And not the kind of quiet I'd gotten used to, the kind that used to feel hollow and distant. This was something else. A space that had been filled, even for a little while, now emptied too suddenly. I spent most of that morning cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned. Wiping down counters that were already spotless. Rearranging the living room pillows for no reason at all. I even refolded the laundry I'd already folded the day before. It was like I was trying to erase the evidence of something I couldn't name. Around 3 p.m., Kyson texted. Flight landed. Be home at 40. That was it. No, missed you. No, how are you? Just the kind of logistical update you send a coworker. Efficient. Cold. I stared at the message a full minute before putting my phone down face first on the counter. And then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I sat down. And I cried. Not loud. Not messy. Just quiet tears that slipped down without warning. The kind of crying you do when you're exhausted by your own pretending. When Kyson walked in, he kissed the top of my head like always and dropped his suitcase by the door. Traffic wasn't bad, he said, pulling off his blazer. Have you eaten yet? I shook my head. Not yet. He didn't notice the puffiness around my eyes, or if he did, he didn't ask. He just turned on the TV and scrolled through his emails like it was any other Tuesday. And maybe that's what stung the most, that everything still functioned exactly as before. That nothing had cracked for him, even though everything inside me had shifted off its axis. At dinner, he talked about the keynote speaker from the conference. Some CEO who had reinvented his company in a post-pandemic world. I nodded along, murmured the right wow-s and that's interesting s at the right places. But my mind was miles away. It was back in the living room with candles flickering. Back on the couch with a glass of red wine. Back in the hallway mirror, where I'd seen my own reflection and remembered, for a moment, that I was still beautiful. Kyson didn't notice that I hadn't touched my food. He didn't notice that I was barely speaking. He didn't notice anything. After dinner, he retreated to his home office, as he always did. I cleared the dishes, scraped my untouched food into the trash, and stood at the sink until the hot water turned my fingers pink. And as I stood there, I realized something that hit me like a punch in the chest. He hadn't changed. I had. The ache wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about everything I had silenced for 17 years. My needs. My body. My voice. Later that night, I found myself walking into Ethan's old room. The door creaked open softly, and I stood in the doorway like a ghost. His cologne still lingered faintly in the air, subtle, clean, familiar. His bed was neatly made. No mess. No clutter. Just stillness. On his desk sat a single item, a folded note, tucked beneath a small ceramic dish he'd made in middle school, the one that still held 2 paper clips and a guitar pick. I stared at the note for a long moment before finally picking it up. The handwriting was his. Slanted, neat. You don't owe me anything. But if you ever wake up and realize you need more, I hope you remember this summer. No signature. No goodbye. Just that. My hand trembled as I folded the paper back in half and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. I stood there in the middle of his empty room, barefoot, eyes glassy, chest tight, and I whispered to no one. I already do. The days after Ethan left moved slowly. Not in a dramatic way, just with that kind of weight that settles over a house when something unspoken has taken root in its walls. Kyson and I went back to our rhythm, if you could even call it that. Mornings were filled with silence, evenings with reruns we never finished, and nights with a bed that felt too big and too cold. But I had changed. And the thing about changing, once you notice it, you can't go back to who you were before. Not without lying to yourself. I no longer cried when I was alone. I no longer asked Kyson questions he didn't have answers for. And I no longer blamed myself for feeling invisible. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew what it meant to be seen. And once someone looks at you like that, like you're light, like you're alive, it's impossible to forget it. One evening, I was sitting out on the porch again, same glass of wine in my hand, same old wind brushing against my skin. The porch light was still working, the one Ethan replaced. I hadn't touched it since. The chair next to me sat empty. But I didn't feel alone. I thought about him often, not with shame, and not even with longing. Just, truthfully. I thought about how he'd looked at me like I mattered. Like I was more than Kyson's wife, more than a woman stuck in routine. Like I was still capable of being loved out loud. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not losing Ethan. But remembering how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to feel wanted. Kyson eventually asked me one night if something was wrong. I said no. Because what else could I say? Yes, actually. I kissed your son. I wore a red dress he bought me. I remembered I was a woman before I ever became a wife. But I didn't say that. I just smiled, said I was tired, and rolled over. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about Ethan anymore. This was about me. Months passed. Ethan never came back that summer. We never called. Never messaged. We didn't need to. Because what happened between us wasn't meant to last forever. It wasn't some epic love story or forbidden romance. It was a reminder. A soft, electric, terrifying, beautiful reminder. That I was still in there. Somewhere underneath the routine and silence and cold sheets, I was still breathing. I haven't worn that red dress again. It stays in the back of my closet, tucked behind old coats and scarves. But every now and then, when the house is quiet and the night feels honest, I pull it out, just to feel the weight of it in my hands. And I remember that summer. Not with guilt. But with grace. Because sometimes, the person who changes you forever, isn't someone you end up with. It's just someone who looked at you and said, "You're worth more than this." And for a second, you believed it. If this story made you feel something, anything, don't keep it to yourself. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been seen by someone you shouldn't have fallen for? Or maybe, someone finally reminded you of who you used to be? Black heart like this video if it touched you in any way. Bell hit subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable stories like this one. Loudspeaker and share this with someone who needs to feel seen. You're not alone. And your story matters, too.